Welcome back to Data Protection Gumbo. I'm Demetrius Malbro, your host. And today on the show, I have the co founder and CEO of Carbide, Darren Gallop. And he is a cybersecurity expert. And also, he runs a cybersecurity firm that provides businesses of all sizes with the tools they need to adopt a strong cybersecurity and privacy posture. So, Darren, how are you today? And welcome to the Gumbo.
I'm great. Thanks for having me. Excited to be on the show.
All right. Why don't you start us off with giving us maybe your story around getting to the CEO and co-founder spot of Carbide?
Yeah, it's definitely not a straight forward journey. Went to university after 2 years of spending lots of money to mostly have a lot of fun and meet a lot of people and party and have having no idea what I wanted to do with my life.
Yeah.
I left school after 2 years, went on an exchange program overseas, which was really eye opening. And the expression go to Europe and find yourself. I don't know what I
Yep.
was doing over there, but I found that I had a lot of big dreams and actually, grew up in a very, very musical, very artsy family. My mom owned a dance business, and art school.
Hmm.
So that's what I grew up around. I actually came to the conclusion on this exchange program that I wanted to take a crack at being a professional musician and seeing
Hmm.
what that was going to be. And so came home and got fast to work in starting a band. Had one band. We ended up, having some regional success, but mostly fought all the time and disagreed about everything, including every song we ever wrote and what we were going to do and
Yeah.
where we were going to play and who we were going to play for.
Hmm.
And then I ended up, going and becoming a session musician for a while, doing a bunch of gigs there. Um, and you ended up about 8 years of it with a few different bands. Got into production because I started getting a little
Wow.
tired of the
Okay.
road after a while. So, engineering and producing records. I worked on probably 25, 28 records, something like that. Started a record label in
Wow. Okay.
97,
Hmm.
98, and ran that for a few years. Ended up becoming an EMI affiliated label. Of course, things like Napster and the whole drop of the economy and the music industry change and our record label. We
Hmm.
struggled. It's a hard business, as I learned the hard way. It's a hard business at the best of times, and of course, the certain things happen in the world. So,
Yeah.
2008, I started my first technology company. I built a company by the name of Mercado, and it was an
Okay.
event management platform that effectively it was a SaaS company for businesses when most of us weren't really using SaaS companies,
Hmm.
and we managed the back end. So the whole premise was helping manage the logistics and the chaos that happens in building and managing large cultural events like music festivals. And by 2014, we were the back end by some of the biggest music festivals in the world. We had
Yeah.
customers like Bonnaroo, Coachella, Burning Man. We even had sports events like X Games, comedy festivals like Just for
Hmm.
Laughs festivals. And not only in the US and Canada, but we were also in Mexico and in Australia and all over Europe. We were effectively, by the time we sold that company in 2018, we were operating in 23 different countries with
Wow.
events, cultural events of all types. And that's really where this whole engagement around security happened. As we started getting more involved, our platform grew, and we started working with more commercial events that are owned by enterprises like Disney owned properties and
Hmm.
AEG properties and Live Nation properties. They were very concerned about the large amounts of data that we were storing and processing. They were very concerned about their dependence on us as a small company up here in Canada, that
Yeah.
our availability requirements were substantial. If we went down for 20 minutes at an impromptu time, it could have massive impact. So data integrity, data availability, confidentiality, all that stuff was really critical in that business. And it really forced me to learn a ton about cybersecurity. We had to go
Okay.
through the process of having our infrastructure reviewed by a third party. Of course, we were all music guys who were into tech, who were building software, and it was all about make it work, make it look pretty good. And
Hmm.
we didn't have the education. So obviously when we started going through these assessment processes, there was a lot of discovery that wasn't super positive. So really
Yeah.
forced us to up our game. We had to go through a SOC 2 audit. We had to do an ISO 27001 audit. And then, by the end, but when I was doing, before I sold it, we had to go through all the preparational process to become compliant with GDPR, and that was, another lift. So
Yeah.
those
Okay.
years from 2014 right to the end, that's 4 years where I would say about 50% of my time was actually focused on building a security program, upgrading the security of our web application and our processes and our other tools, our on-prem technology,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and implementing data privacy and learning all the while of doing it. So
Wow. Okay.
that's how
Yeah.
I,
Yeah. Yeah.
pretty weird. I think if you went back and found my long haired,
Your picture.
me in the back of a van and going on tour with some funk rock band and told me I was going to be the CEO of a cybersecurity company,
Yeah.
I'm not even sure I would have understood what that even means. So certainly wasn't a path that was deliberate.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, what I found really fascinating when we were going about this process, and it started in 2014, is that a lot of the infrastructure, a lot of the tools out there at that time, a lot of the policy templates and other things that we had access to were really designed around more like not the old school, like the perimeter, the network,
Yeah.
enterprise security.
Physical
Like,
stuff. Right.
yeah, and it was like there was not really a lot of stuff around cloud, around like
Mm-hmm.
remote work, around like working on the go. The language was very technical. Like a lot of the policy templates that we would have downloaded from some of the different sources really sounded like it was like the lawyers and the really techie people got together and wrote, the kind of stuff that I didn't really think my employees would understand or relate to. And I just felt like, I remember when we initially looked at the problem, I was like, I'll just go to like a SANS website and download some stuff and,
Yeah.
find all org name change to Mercado and just ship that off to our employees and thumbs up. But, it was really quickly
Now
we
let me
realized that
ask you this. Let me ask you this. That was a great explanation of your background, and I love the whole music aspect of it, and being able to, I guess, produce music and record company. I mean, are there any parallels with music production and running a company, or producing music, or any parallels between music and cybersecurity? I'm just talking maybe from a procedure and process perspective. If you've ever
absolutely.
thought of that before.
Absolutely, and I've thought about it in depths.
Okay.
So outside of cybersecurity, just the general running a business, it's a business and the human factor and the leadership and the communication, all that. It doesn't matter. I think whether you're in a political environment, whether you're in a small business or an enterprise, that stuff
Mhm.
translates very well from industry to industry. Specific to security, we think about the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability.
Availability. Mhm.
um, all my recording and production work that I did was all in a digital environment. So, some
Okay.
of the early stuff we were using tape, but people, the convenience of being able to like take another take and take a little section there and copy and paste that, and that really took on quickly. So, when I started doing engineering, the first thing I needed to do was I didn't understand the computer system into the degree of depth that I felt I need to really
Mhm.
run
Mhm.
a system. Availability. If somebody's taking making the best cut of their track everywhere and the vibes go and everyone's
Yeah,
smiling,
right.
it's like, yeah, this is the best cut ever. And they're going and
Mhm.
they got hired musicians in, and all of a sudden you're like, oh shit. Oh no, an error in
Yeah.
your system fails, right? So, right there out of the gate, through trial and error, I had to learn to make sure that system was always ready. It was always going to run. So segregating it from being online, not installing any applications that have not that aren't specific to the recording. So really building a purpose-built machine and turning off any functionality to make sure it's stable, to make sure when we need that machine on, it's available to go. And when those musicians are there, the clock is ticking, people are flying into for a recording, and there's a lot of
Mhm.
stakes, and there's nothing that'll derail a musician or make people more mad at you than sorry, I lost that take. And then, so moving on, integrity, like you've got a bunch of different files, you got people recording tracks in different studios, you got to bring all that stuff together, you have timing and sync, and you've got to make sure your bit rates and your
Mhm.
all these
Mhm.
things are proper. So, and I've had this happen. I've had the bad experience of, oh no, all these tracks are out of sync. How do we
Yeah.
reconstruct this? And of
Quantize.
course, yeah, like all that kind of stuff, right? So integrity, availability, absolutely critical. I've seen cases where people recorded all day and didn't realize that they didn't have their timing clock set.
Yeah,
And then
yeah,
there's this clicking sound, and there's all kinds of integrity in the data,
yeah.
so that the track's not usable. And then confidentiality. I mean, you're basically, you could be working with an artist for 6 months or more on what's to them a very important release, and you're making rough mixes all the time for people to
Mm-hmm.
be able to listen to in their car and their headphones, tried in different stereos, share it with their label, doing things like that. So you had to share data, you had to put these files in a way that they're online. So yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, we had an incident once. We had an incident where somebody breached a bunch of rough mixes, months and months
Okay.
before a record went out. I mean, these are real problems, and that was something that caused a lot of friction between myself and the client. So yeah,
Yeah.
definitely a lot of parallels. Certainly when you're talking about the music production component,
Okay. Yeah.
in a big way. And so like when I went in, I spent a lot of time focusing on making sure, and you learn sometimes, unfortunately, through the bad experiences, but it thought a
Yeah.
lot about making sure stuff was confidential, making sure the integrity of sessions were always dialed, and redundant backups. Like, you wouldn't leave a studio with both the, like, what if, imagine if you got robbed and you've got your computer with
Yeah.
one
Right.
version of the month's work, and then you've got your backup hard drive. So I would literally leave a hard drive at a studio, take one with me, send one
Mm-hmm.
home with one of the bandmates so they have it, and then tell the studio they can ship me the hard drive once I knew that both me and the bandmate were home. So absolutely, like, I really
Yeah.
consider a lot of that time I spent running, the engineering componentry of, professional recordings. To me, that was time in the trenches, learning about, some of those core principles of data security.
Yeah, and I just love that music analogy. And as you were mentioning, keeping one hard drive in the studio, taking one with you, and then taking shipping one off to somewhere else. So that's sounds like the old 3-2-1 strategy and backup principle of keeping three different copies on two different media types and making sure that one of those copies is stored
Mhm.
offsite somewhere,
Yeah.
which is super critical. Now, I want to also talk about. Now, you have a CISO title, co-founder, CEO, but I know you have the CISSP as well. So you're really deep from a security perspective, and and based on the studies, it's a very stressful job, right? I just did an episode maybe one or two ago, and we talked about the dirty little secrets of being a CISO, and she mentioned that it was a very stressful job and it wasn't quite what she thought she was signing up for because it's just a lot that goes into it. Have you seen some of these stressors and give some advice to the gumbo listeners how to guess be prepared and proactive to minimize some of those stressors when it's coming to kind of reducing the risk in your environment?
Yeah, so one of the things I'll say right out of the gate is that my experience in running a cybersecurity program, I think, is fairly unique, because being the CEO and being a board member and a substantial shareholder in the company, I
Mhm.
don't have to deal with a lot of the challenges that talking to my other friends that are CISOs that have to go to management and request
Yeah.
funding, and have to get buy-in across various different departments and ports of the organization. So
Mhm.
I think that's one of the challenges that I've seen with some of my friends that are CISOs, is they feel that a lot of the times they are not able to get the buy-in they need across the organization, and
Okay.
that might
Yeah.
be resources in terms of, so they know they're not doing a great job necessarily, or there's certain vulnerabilities that they would like to see remediated faster, but they're not able to get the allocation out of the board or out of senior management.
Mhm.
So that's one thing that I feel, I can do a lot of the stuff myself, and I can make decisions, and I can really report that. I think
Yeah.
for when I talk to my CISO friends about how do you mitigate that, I always recommend that they take courses on leadership and read books that are more on, like, how can you think about, how do you present these topics in a more articulated, in a more
Mhm.
urgent way, and
Mhm.
really talk about risk, thinking about risk through an organizational lens, and maybe try to de-acronym, like, don't use all the acronyms, and really think about, like, look at what your organization really focuses on. A lot of times
Yeah.
it's things like net revenue retention, and it's growth, and it's margin, and its
Mhm. Mhm.
reputation, and its market perception, and all these things. and take examples of where you see the risks in your risk assessment could potentially cause major issues, but really apply that to where the business and leadership is really thinking about the business as their priorities. Take real life examples. So an example I'd say is, like, if you're a 150 person company and you're the CISO of that company, don't use the Equifax or the Target breach as an example, because that's
Yeah.
not going to resonate. Find companies that look like the company that you're in, and find real life examples. So, I was talking to a car dealership network. They were concerned about some things. Every example I used, I went and did some research. Like, what are some examples of some really bad things that have happened to car
Yeah.
dealerships, roughly the same size as these ones? So it's like, because a lot of people will naively think, oh yeah, well, Target, like, we're different. We're
Was
not
that
Target. Like,
was that Chat GPT that you used to do that?
I do use ChatGPT a lot of times to try to
Yeah.
find, it can be helpful in finding things. It also lies sometimes, so I think you have
Yeah,
to
hallucinate.
validate. There's definitely some hallucination that happens in and across the large language models still. So it's a good place to get some ideas and some potential
Mhm,
sources, but
mhm.
certainly dig deeper than just what GPT brings to the table. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's one side of it. The other areas where people that I've talked to that are in that role that don't have the same degree of authority and leadership within the business is they always feel like if something bad happens, that they're getting the boot. And
Mhm.
if you look at it, there's a lot of cases there. A lot of organizations decide there has to be a sacrificial lamb in this fallout, and often it's
Yeah.
and I think that's a bearing of stress that I know some of my colleagues and friends that are in that CISO or that security leadership role in organizations feel. I don't feel that,
Mhm.
because that's a worst case scenario. They'd be like, okay, we got to get a dedicated. And we've actually, I think I told you in our last call, we've actually, I've actually removed myself more and more from that role,
Yeah.
because I actually have, one of the challenges I find in my role is there is a bit of conflict of
Mhm.
interest,
One
conflict
throat to
of time.
choke.
Yeah, conflict of time, right? Like, I started delegating more and more of the security responsibilities in the business to make up for the growing corporate responsibilities as my role evolves as the CEO.
Mhm.
And I think when you're really small, it's fine. You have to wear multiple hats and you got to spin plates. Like in my last company, I owned the cybersecurity program. Well, for
Okay.
the first half of that company, there wasn't a cybersecurity program, so I certainly, that was naivety and youth and just not knowing. And
Mhm.
but once we realized and customers clarified what their expectations were, I owned that, and I wore both those hats
Okay.
in that business. But in this business, yeah, I did for quite a long time, but we now have another individual in the business that owns that. But having my experience and knowledge in it, I ask more pointed questions, and I certainly make. And this is another thing that I think a lot of CISOs struggle with is and a belief. This falls into a belief that I've come to over the
Mhm.
observation of hundreds of companies and what companies do well at security and which ones don't. If senior leadership, more specifically the CEO, is not behind the program and is
That is
not
correct.
somewhat participating and isn't leading by example,
Mhm.
the
Right.
program is BS.
Yeah.
I can
It's
tell you
gonna
right now,
fail.
I can talk to the CEO and just have a conversation, and just by the attitude, I guarantee you with about 90% accuracy, I can give you pretty good
Mhm.
insight on how strong the security program in the business is. And
Right.
if the CEO's like, oh yeah, we got IT deals with that, I guarantee you when you start peeling back the layers of the onion, you're going to
Mhm.
find all kinds of skeletons in there. But when the
Yeah.
CEO knows what they do, can talk about the role that they have, says that they see reports, when they can talk about it with that acumen and that
Yeah.
degree of importance and knowledge, then I guarantee you your findings will be much lighter in terms of, there's always opportunity to improve every security program. There's no
Yeah.
such thing as perfection, but that is a huge indicator.
Yeah, and the CEO definitely. So it has to be a top-down approach, right? Where the CEO is the one that's fully accountable, right?
Yeah,
Because we've seen cases where some of the casinos, right? They were breached. And also I think it was SolarWinds where they actually filed a case against the CISO there for maybe the material event that he misspoke on, or I forgot exactly what it was, but it was really a turning point with chief information security officers in the industry where Now they were actually going after CISOs
Yeah,
as well, and
that's
the
scary.
CEO of the company as well, because they're both the accountability, or
Yeah,
they're the data owners, right, at the top of the food chain. So from a compliance perspective, it's really critical. And so
yeah.
cybersecurity should be a business enabler instead of a hindrance to just let's zero trust everything, and and don't give our employees access to proper access and authority to access what they need to at that level and at that layer. So one thing I do want to ask as well is just around artificial intelligence. There's a lot of hype around it, and we mentioned Chat GPT. Have you worked with any large language models, and what's your thoughts or predictions for AI in cybersecurity?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked. I'm working pretty closely with a variety of different models.
Hmm.
Um, where both older, more simplistic sort of decision tree expert system type models, which we've used for some time now in how we automate some of the proceduralization of our governance risk compliance platform.
Hmm.
We have built an integration with an LLM where we are using the LLM to assist in document generation around things like procedures, policies,
Okay. Yeah.
checklists. We're actively using that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Recently took an online course offered created by Wharton Online,
Hmm.
Penn State University, on AI for business,
I
just
saw
to
that.
just to learn what's going on out there, and what are some of the studies, and what are people thinking. We are actually working currently on some policy and documentation best practices, implementation of some sort of control framework that covers AI governance. And there's a lot of legal activity happening globally at various different levels of jurisdiction.
Hmm.
So it's I think people have been kind of sleeping around AI, and then all of a sudden things took that
Boom.
very incremental whack.
Hmm.
Now it's real, and I think governments and policymakers are scrambling around trying to figure out how do they manage that. There's a lot of
Right.
questions around ethics, there's a lot of questions around data privacy, there's a lot of just questions around security, accuracy, things like that. And the IAPP, the International Association of Privacy Professionals, is coming out with a certification program. They're building it right now. They expect it to launch and you can be tested on it in
Hmm.
this quarter. It's called the AIGP, Artificial Intelligence
Oh.
Governance Professional. And they have a
Okay.
whole common body of knowledge and everything that they've built out. I'm actually reviewing and studying from that. Some of my stuff that I did at the Wharton Online
Hmm.
actually covers, and it was partly the thinking around that was some preparedness for understanding some of the componentry before reading the common body of knowledge and getting ready. I will assumably do that cert.
Okay.
We see a lot of our companies either specializing in AI products or adding AI as a core component. So, we're seeing a lot of questions that our customers are asking us about ethics and security and legal
Hmm.
concerns. So, we're very aggressively upskilling ourselves on that governance component, on that compliance, how it affects security, privacy, things like
Okay.
that, and using and building within tools. We're training models, we're testing models internally. So yeah, I mean, I think if I were to talk about how I expect, what I predict AI will do, there's already a lot of things AI has changed in cybersecurity, both on the malicious actor side
Right.
and on the protection side. So the good guy, bad guy. The bad guys, well,
Hmm.
remember when you used to get those emails and it was very obvious that John Smith is probably in another country and English isn't his best suit. Well,
Misspelled. Yeah.
that's there's no excuse for that anymore. You can take your broken English email, dump it into ChatGPT, and have it write that email in a more convincing way, or you could just write it
Right.
in your mother tongue if that's whatever you speak, Spanish or French or whatever, and have it write that, really contextualize it into English. You can even have it, like, for example, if I had a couple of examples of you writing emails or blog posts or stuff like that, I could
Hmm.
train a GPT chat window to write like you and to really identify and break out what are the words, what's the tone, how do you write, what do you not say, what do you say, and then I
Yeah.
could write emails the way I write emails and have it translate, build a custom chat tool that would effectively take what I write and spit it out in the way you write, right? So,
Hmm.
and I could even do that voice wise. I could take a recording of you talking in this
Yeah.
very podcast episode, and I could talk and in real time it would use your accent and the way you use words and your
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
intonation and all of that stuff, right? So
It's
that's
scary.
just the surface. There's also really strong automation tools that are popping up in the dark web that are basically like ransomware as a service or other sort of malicious software as a service tools that people can automate certain parts of the process, whether that's going out and scoping, generating leads or scanning websites or scanning web applications looking for
Mm-hmm.
known vulnerabilities. So that's only going to just keep growing exponentially. So it's kind of like if you
Yeah.
think of
Yeah.
it,
Okay.
and at the same time we've got these intrusion detection prevention tools and these antivirus tools, anomaly detection tools in various different
Yeah.
areas that are whether it's scanning emails, scanning attachments, scanning network activity, cloud activity, that are starting to become more intelligent. So the old days of just reading logs, which is like
Mm-hmm. Right.
this
Yeah.
happened, that happened. What does
You
this all
talking
mean?
a million lines can be analyzed in like a couple seconds with AI, right?
So it's like a
Yes.
very complicated version of if you think about like, somebody came up with a radar detector once. Somebody came up with a radar gun so the
Mm-hmm.
coppers could catch us speeding. And then somebody's like, oh, I got an idea. We can detect that radar frequency and I'll drop that in the car. So now that, the speeders that are really committed can buy a product so that they can know where the police are setting up their radar guns. And then like the police are like, well, we'll make that illegal, and then we'll buy a gun that can detect that radar detector.
Mm-hmm.
And then somebody else comes up with a undetectable radar detector, and then the police move to, well, let's start using a laser. I think that's like sort of a more physical or more historical example of what we're seeing happening in terms of how AI is
Yeah.
affecting cybersecurity. And I think if you're working on the defense side, you really need to be staying up to date with just how much more sophisticated the tools and the approaches, and even strategically the hackers can use these LLMs to help them devise
Yeah.
strategies to
Right.
analyze what works, what doesn't, so that they can be more efficient with their time.
All right. And let's begin to wrap up here. I always like to ask my guest for a book recommendation, one that you're reading now or one that you read often. Any recommendations for the Gumbo listeners?
So yeah, the book recommendation one, I read a lot about leadership, and I'll
Okay.
tell you why. I believe that a lot of the security folks that I speak to,
Mhm.
almost all, and this is just my circle. Like I say, I don't know hundreds of people that are CISOs, and probably know more like 12 or 13 that I
Yeah.
communicate with to some regular cadence. And what I find is that all of those folks that I speak with are pretty solid in terms of their understanding of the domain and the expertise. Um, where I feel that they struggle is in that leadership. So I think, I read a lot about leadership. I read a lot about communication in terms
Mhm.
of communicating with executives, learn more about board governance, learn more about
Right.
how the business operates. And last year I read somewhere in the vicinity of 28, 30 books. Most of them were
Wow.
around leadership. Most of them were around leadership, both starting from yourself. How do you
Mhm.
become less emotional? How do you get better at communicating, preparing your presentations, and just building better practices to get engagement? That's another area where I see a lot of my CISO friends struggle. They're like, yeah, I keep asking people to do something, but they don't do it.
Yeah.
It's like,
Right.
you need to learn the psychology of power,
Mm.
because you're not their boss. So you don't have legitimate structural power. So how do
Yeah.
you create power in a way where you can influence those people? How are you communicating? How are you going in there and they're interpreting you as the slap in the wrist, right? So
Mhm. Mhm.
so I don't know if I have a specific book.
Yeah,
I'd
okay.
have to go back to my Goodreads and look at what I've reviewed on the different books, and happy to share that if you want to drop
No,
those out.
that was great advice, and that's particularly what I was looking for is just some recommendations and also some best practices and tidbits of information that can help the gumbo listeners. So I really appreciate that. And also before I let you go, I wanted to put a plug in for the backup and recovery professionals group that I run. There's over, I think we're around 20, almost 23,000 professionals now. So backup and recovery, storage, and even cybersecurity professionals as well are having conversations similar to the ones that we're having here on Data Protection Gumbo. So, Darren, I really appreciate the time that you've spent with us today. And a final shout out for Carbide.
Well, yeah, I really enjoyed being on the show. It's great chatting with you on the show and beforehand as we prepared. You know, thanks to all your listeners. Definitely enjoyed the experience. And any of you out there that want to connect, by all means, Darren Gallop. I'm on LinkedIn. I think there might be only two other Darren Gallops in the world, and they don't work in
Mm,
cybersecurity, so probably pretty easy fellow to find there. So follow me, add me. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And if you do work in or run security, or concerned about the security of your business, in your small, medium, even larger businesses. Now we have
hmm
some look bunch of customers that are well over 1,000 employees. You can go to carbidesecure.com and check out what we have to offer. And our team is there. They're very, very knowledgeable and very responsive if you need any help, or even just want to some feedback. Happy to connect with folks.
Okay. Nice. Well, thank you again for being a guest here. And until next time, everyone, stay secure and back up often.